Welcome to Varn, and specifically nailing it down. And today we're going to be talking about the concept of Tailism, taking a break from our explorations of logic and going into the historical uses of Marxist, communist, and socialist terms. Tailism is the English translation of a word primarily used originally in Lenin's What Is to Be Done, which was a critique of the tendency of various forms of political socialist revolutionaries, narodnikis, which I guess we could translate as to left nationalists, Mensheviks, social democrats, to, quote, lag behind like a tail the progressive elements of the working class movement by reflecting only the reactionary views of the rump of the masses. So instead of letting the more aware elements within the working class itself lead, that in an attempt to be popular, many socialists watered down their message to tail, i.e. fall behind, more populist appeals to the working class. Now, the way the term has been used now, and this actually is a history here that both reflects this Tailism as a critique of populism or as critique of tailing other parties who are already popular, is both clear and not clear in that original usage. Lenin was not accusing Mensheviks and other socialists of tailing, i.e. being behind liberal bourgeois parties. He was accusing them of trying to appeal to the more reactionary social impulses of the masses to make socialism popular. Now, I don't have to tell you that this is a tendency that doesn't go away, but the expansion of the concept really kind of happens over a long period of time. And Tailism was something, for example, lobbied at Lukács. So Lukács was accused of Tailism after his work, History and Class Consciousness. And this is the Hungarian Marxist philosopher and thinker, Grigory Lukács. And the reason why is at the end of that book, he basically argues that there's no way for the working class to be wrong because the methodology of Marxism is the methodology of the working class. So whatever conclusions the Workers' Party and its associate councils, the Soviets, come to must necessarily be correct, even if it is not seemingly part of the prior conclusions of Marxist thinkers. All right. My friend Amog Sahu was a co-host of a show I did for many, many years called Symptomatic Redness, is doing his PhD on Lukács, and has pointed out this is actually probably the formal beginnings of Marxism as a separate category from what the First and Second and even Third International was doing. The reason why he was accused of Tailism here is not immediately obvious by the way Lenin is talking about it, but he was accused of Tailism because it reduced the role of Marxist thinking and the methodologies of historical and dialectical materialism, as emergent phenomenon, which is really codified by Stalin in the text of the same name. And we must remember, and I should probably do a video on this, neither historical materialism nor dialectical materialism are particularly unique to Marxists, but the Marxist instantiation of it is unique. And we can see historical materialism as kind of a Marxist methodology, the understanding of modes of production, how they emerge, the fine points in which they emerge, how that drives social relation and social development, the understanding of social relations as part of the base of the superstructure, etc. And even the way we talk about them, these kind of metaphors and models that we use come out of this classical Marxism that relates back to Marx. Dialectical materialism is kind of a further development of some of the ideas in the Anti-Dering and in the dialectics of nature, as well as some of the conceptual ideas in Capital and the Grundrisse, which make a kind of Hegelian view of the world very useful. The pitfalls of dialectical materialism are also quite known because the linguistic unclarity of what can be called a contradiction and the way categories can be easily shifted around in dialectical materialism has been one of the fundamental critiques of Marxism. But what Lukács does is effectively says that there is no real substance to those categories. Like, it's just a methodology. There's no epistemological claims, which dialectical materialism would make. Dialectical materialism would even make ontological claims. I mean, materialism is an ontological claim, and it would be posited against other kinds of ontological claims. One of the more famous ones is Lenin's critique of materialist monism. A critique that I find actually somewhat unpersuasive, but that's a whole nother day. So Tailism there was the official Soviet line, critiquing Lukács for removing the specificity of a Marxist logic to just the will of the workers' councils if they organize as the proof of the emergence of the methodology of revolution. There's much to critique in that as well. All right. But this actually kind of denotes a tendency in, the 1920s and 30s to expand the category of tailism from just tailing sort of reactionary conservative positions in the working class that may not be universal to the working class, in fact, aren't universal to the working class, but as a way to get cheap popularity. And the reason why it was called tailism, it's kind of like in English when we talk about wagging the dog. It's an attempt to control people by appealing to their baser instinct and kind of slipping them and tricking them into socialism. This is something that Marx also infamously criticized the French Marxists during his lifetime of doing, not in the same way, not of base popular appeal, but he was accusing them of trying to pass reforms that they knew would fail so that in them failing, the populace would be radicalized. And that was something Marx explicitly advised against. But he didn't call that tailism. That's not what he said. In fact, the most famous phrase, "If this is Marxism, I am not a Marxist," is in reference specifically to that. Tailism gets expanded after Lukács even more. So by the time you get to the 1940s, it becomes crucial to Maoism. In Mao's text on the coalition government, which is really published right on the eve of the end of World War II in 1945 in April. Tailism is any type of work, which is also wrong, because in failing below the level of political consciousness of the masses and violating the principle of leading the masses forward, it reflects the disease of deleteriousness. Our comrades must not assume that the masses have no understanding of what they themselves do not yet understand. It often happens that the masses outstrip us and are eager to advance a step when our comrades are still tailing behind certain backwards elements, for instead of acting as leaders of the masses, such as Conrad reflects the views of these backwards elements, and moreover, mistake them for the broad masses. So what Mao is saying there is very similar to what Lenin is saying. But you see, it is also not as specific. It is no longer just falling behind on cultural issues and tailing them. It is now, in general, tailing the already popular or the already existing instead of pushing forward for new formations and social formations. So instead of just kind of conservative cultural populism being critiqued in tailism, now we're critiquing it as, instead of pushing forward and ahead and being adventurous, we are offering a program that is what people already have on offer. This leads to the 1960s and 70s to refer to elements of popular frontism, which had itself been part of, Third International Communism and then the Soviet line, in official communist parties in Latin America and Europe and in the United States. So the CPUSA followed this line as too in the 1950s, which is you must align with progressive elements of bourgeois parties to codify and work with the state to make sure reactionary developments don't happen. This is largely because of what was seen as the somewhat disaster of third periodism, which was the refusal to work with either social democrats or bourgeois parties, and to condemn them as social fascist, and taking a line similar to like left communists in Italy, that fascism was not their concern, and that it was a sign of the end of capitalism and little else. This led to the popular frontism, partly, if one is being cynical, driven by the need for coalition in World War II, which is maintained, however, I mean, it's maintained in the CPUSA to this day. The official communist parties often worked in allegiance with socialist parties, sometimes actually taking economic positions to the right of socialist parties in France and Chile, for example. And you can see episodes on my show talking about that, and specifically, if you want to go back and listen to some episodes, any episode I've done with Nicholas Scott are the episodes I did on the situation of 1968. Anytime we talk about that, this will come up. This led to certain dissident Marxist-Leninist and Trotskyist factions, both actually kind of separately, accusing official communism of tailing bourgeois parties. And you start seeing this a lot. For example, the Communist Federation of Britain, Marxist-Leninist, has a sort of infamous essay written by Sam, I believe, well, it's not known who it's actually written by. It was edited and put together by Sam Richards and Paul Sava, called Vote Labor is Tailism, attacking entryism, which is a kind of different strategy, but is often accused of Tailism, as a means of subordinating yourself to parties that were broadly popular with the working class, but did not really offer anything but bourgeois liberalism. So Tailism becomes expanded to a critique of the popular front sort of detente domestically in non-communist countries with liberal bourgeois parties, with the progressive end of the bourgeoisie. This also, in the case of Maoism, and in almost all cases, in the case of Soviet communism, in some cases, led to the ideas of things like bourgeois development being needed in national liberation movements, comprador versus non-comprador bourgeoisie, so progressive versus regressive bourgeoisie, kind of new ideas. And this is becomes associated around justifying or not justifying coalition parties with either elements of bourgeois governments or with bourgeois parties formally. And people who resisted this, and this resistance comes in all political traditions and official communism. So left communists, of course, resist this. And for those who don't know what left communists are, that's councilist, Marxist, syndicalist, to some degree, although many left communists would not claim them, Bordigist, which, hyper-Leninist. They had always accused the Popular Front of being basically Tailist. But in addition to that, you start seeing the expansion of the term as a kind of inter-communist critique of these coalitions. So the term morphs from trying to appeal to populism to trying to appeal to populism, usually specifically on culturalist or jingoistic lines. And Bukharin and Przepozinski's ABCs of Communism, they refer to this as like jingoistic communism and Narodnikyism or left nationalism. And this was also one of the early critiques of the CPUSA, of the Socialist Party of America, and the prior populist movement in the 19th century, which, that it was a progressive movement, but it ultimately succumbed to Tailism, was the early critiques from the CPUSA of the prior kind of proto-socialist and socialist movements in America. So one of the confusing ways this manifests now is when we say Tailism, we've had this expansion of the term. So when I say someone is tailing, I mean both that they could be appealing to popular cultural things that are not progressive, i.e., like they try to appeal to, say, reactionary nostalgia for better times, patriarchal norms, nationalism, particularly nationalism in developed imperial cores, which is different structurally from nationalism in communist countries. Although I would also not honestly support that nationalism. I think European-style nationalism ends up being a bane on socialist development, no matter how you cut it. But that's my position. So you see this expansion of the term over time. So you start with trying to be popular as socialist by tailing reactionary views that not even all the working class has, to trying to be popular by tailing views that the working class already has, but not pushing forward beyond that, which is definitely, you see how it's related, or saying whatever the working class believes is right, that there's no substance to Marxism, which is what Lukács is accused of, which, these are all things that rhyme, but are slightly different from each other. And then you get to trying to enter bourgeois coalitions and kind of factions of communist groups critiquing mainline communist groups for, moving to the right to stay in safe coalitions with bourgeois or social democratic parties, particularly in Latin America and Western and Central Europe, outside of the Warsaw Pact. And you can see why Maoists, if you know the history of Maoism begins as a united front movement. The Kuomintang under Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen's a key figure to both the Chinese communist and the Chinese nationalist. He's kind of the founder of like multinational nationalism in China. The idea of the five main Chinese peoples, etc. Into Maoism, which has to break from that in the Civil War, actually somewhat accelerating that and slightly upsetting Stalin. And you see this kind of cascade effect where there's both a call for popular fronts and a critique of it, both from the left opposition, which is different from less communists. The left opposition are like Zhevniites, Trotskyists, etc. From the USSR standpoint, which also critique official communism for being too conciliatory to either national bourgeoisies or nationalist elements. Hence, you have a spectrum here of the expansion of the term. But the one key thing that it shares in all its instantiations, okay, is that you're accusing people of trying to be popular, not by offering something new or more, but by offering something that already exists, either culturally, by ignoring or playing up to kind of stereotypical images of working class people, as like rural Southern white people are whatever, or by tailing them, by offering them things like milquetoast social reforms that you're going to provide as part of coalitions with bourgeois parties or with bourgeois labor parties, etc. What's a bourgeois labor party, you might ask? I might do a whole clarification on this because this term has actually become abused in social democratic circles in America. But a bourgeois labor party is a workers' party, a party founded by the coalition of unions that exist in a capitalist state and does not necessarily call for anything beyond reforms of that state. All right. But I can go into that history at another time. So you can see the expansion of this category. When I tend to say Tailism, I mean using something that people think is popular with the working class, often without defining who or what they mean by the working class, by going by their own gut instinct as to what it is. If only everything was that simple. And trying to provide them with an idea that already exists to get them on your side. This Tailism to me is a problem both by people tailing the Democrats and by people tailing conservative opinions to try to make things popular and move people to socialism instead of forging ahead with ideas already emerging from the working class and pushing them forward. All right. That is a subtle distinction, and it does relate to all the versions of Tailism that have kind of been used since Lenin coined the term. Well, I'm not sure Lenin actually coined the term, but since Lenin used the term in a communist context all the way back in What Is to Be Done. All right. And hopefully that nailed down that term for you, so you understand historically how it has been used, how it has been expanded, and why it's a useful concept for understanding different strategies that probably won't work that socialists try to attempt now. And with that, have a good day.